walk into the Burger King and shoot everybody. What do you want from me? God told me to do it. Okay, what's going to do? Right, son, whatever. It's throughout history. I'm sure you could find every day somewhere in the world someone doing something, right, like this. So one of the people who questioned this way of looking at things was Martin Buber. He said, well, the real question then theologically is the question of, we could call it the question of hearing. How do you know that it was God who told you that? How do you know that it's not your own psychosis speaking to you? Right? And that's, for Buber and a whole other way of existential philosophy, that became one of the main questions of how do you sort out the inner voices within yourself. Are you really sure? I think Woody Allen, in one of his books, he has a thing like this. Just because you heard something in a deep, well-intoned voice, does that mean that it came from God? What, are you out of your mind?
Isn't there a midrash that the Satan came to Abraham?
So Buber, this really wasn't his tradition. And Buber got this exactly. Buber got this as a whole stream of midrashim. Most of the midrashim, as a matter of fact, talk about the Akedah. They talk about the Satan coming to him, and he appears like this, and he's not. And that's, allegorically, is really talking about this same issue of how does Abraham Avinu have the certainty to know that it wasn't, in the way that the Midrash is talking about, that it was either a Kadosh Baruch Hu or the Satan. And we would say psychologically that it's either, something real or it's something, some type of psychotic imagination going on in your own head. How could we know about this? So, at any rate, the answer to this tension comes up. Kierkegaard asks a question, and usually, there's people say that we remember from college. Someone once offered, I think on Saturday Night Live, they had this skit where they said, it's the 10-minute college. And what we will do, we will teach you everything that you remember from college 20 years later. As I said, economics, supply and demand. Okay, that's all you can remember, 10 years down the line, that's all you can know, that's all you have to know. And he went through all these different things. So, but if anybody has taken philosophy or religion 101, the one catchphrase they might remember from Kierkegaard is the teleological suspension of the ethic. And what does Kierkegaard mean by that? Teleological, telos meaning Greek, meaning the end. So for some other end, we can suspend what we understand as the ethical. Right? And he asked the question, is there a teleological suspension of the ethical? And more or less, he answers, yes, there is, but it is so above and beyond our understanding that we can't understand it. Only somebody, and this is who calls Avraham Avinu the knight of faith. Only the knight of faith can understand that, and we can't grasp it. And what we're going to look at in a minute, one second, what we're going to look at in a minute is part of his explaining this. And one more thing, because I don't think he mentioned it here, but the questions that you asked about the Amalek or the seven nations, etc. So Kierkegaard, he says, look, there are in many, many instances two different ethical commands. Right? And he gives a bunch of examples of this. He says there's two different ethical commands. On the one hand, we have, lo tirtzach. On the other hand, all of a sudden we say, well, go kill these seven nations, or go wipe out Amalek, or whatever. And he says this is the question that faces the tragic hero. But the tragic hero is not facing ethics versus something which he would call, again, the teleological suspension of the ethical, which more or less would mean the not ethical. Right? There's no way in the world you can say that killing your son because God told me it's not ethical. According to this view of what ethical is. It's not an ethical act in any way, shape, or form. Right? He said, but in these instances, we have two different moral commands. On the one hand, if we could say, if we don't wipe them out, right, the seven nations, they're condemned because of all their sinning, etc., by God, and if we don't wipe them out, they're going to kill us. Or if we say, for example, he brings the story of Agamemnon, who has to sacrifice his daughter in order to save the city. He says, it's a terrible thing, but there he is a tragic hero, because he's balancing two different ethical values. One, save my own family, save my daughter, or save the entire city. And because that, right, something like that. And he's not going ahead and doing something immoral, but he's choosing between two different types of morality, and maybe we're talking about Avraham Avinu, right? So maybe his the story in Sodom V'Amorah, right, is another example. Is the first, maybe the first Jewish example of the Malachim, right? That when Lot says, take my daughters in order to save his guests, that's a tragedy, because there's no choice which is not tragic in that situation. But it's a choice between two competing ethical claims. And usually, when we deal with ethics, what we're usually dealing with are competing ethical claims. Yeah.
We have this sort of like a rebellious child. It sounds like there's a direct command, but Chazal, I guess we're so perplexed with that command, even though it tells you or it implies that, look, for Baruch to become such a bad guy, it's better to kill him now, but somehow Chazal make it in a way that
they make it
couldn't do it.
impossible. It's impossible to carry out. And
the
Israeli jurist, Khan Cohen, an interesting character. So he wrote an article about this. I don't know if it was an article just about that, or he mentioned it in a different article. But he said that the whole thrust of it is that it takes place in public. And the idea was that and I think that like now in Israel, it's illegal to strike your child, right? So that was the same idea, that you can't punish your child in the house. It has to take place in the public sphere. And once you move it out in the public sphere, it becomes something different. You can't go ahead and chop, you look in the Arab world, they kill their daughters. It happens. Like, in the Muslim world, an unfaithful wife, she gets that, but it's within the home, right? And by moving it outside, it becomes, just that makes it almost impossible. Whereas you have, a whole situation. And that's what they said in this, and then people were very upset about this. How the Israeli, it wasn't a law, it was a decision, a judicial decision. It wasn't a legislative decision. Right? Some people said, how can you tell people what they can do with it? I said, no. What we're doing is giving the opportunity to take this case of potential parental abuse outside of the house. And once it's outside, it's over. Once you do that, it's over. You can't, and that's what we want to do. But at any rate, to get back to this, so now I'm going to hand out two texts. I got another one here. And let me just say one more thing before we start again. One thing I forgot to mention is that if there's a Jewish version of this teleological suspension of the ethical, there's something that's called Avera Lishma, right? Which occurs in the Gemara, it occurs in Brachot Samach Gimel, it occurs in Nazir, and there's different, one of the examples is Yael Hakimi. Right? When she kills Sisra, she goes, and according to Chazal, it's not so clear from the text, but Chazal say she slept with him, right? And that's just my note. But she slept with Sisra before she killed him. It was also trying to do that. But again, is that Avera Lishma? Is that these two competing ethical claims, or is it really a suspension of the ethical, like Eliyahu Har Carmel? He goes against this, the Ferush, he goes against the commandment of having Bamot, and he sets up outside of Jerusalem, etc. And he goes ahead and does something again in order for, for Kiddush Hashem. So
we have the
right, Shabbat Chak, right? This kind of idea. But the question again is, if we would look at all those instances, are all those instances competing ethical claims, or are they, what Kierkegaard understands this, is that it's a complete disregard for the ethical, disregard for anything in order to do something else. But now, one of the ways that he solves this problem is what we can call Avraham Avinu's being of two minds. And what I want to look at is a little bit of the text itself from Fear and Trembling, and then look at something which predates Kierkegaard, and I'm sure neither had any awareness one or the other, but is in a certain way is similar and winds up circumventing the ethical question that we're faced with here. So Kierkegaard says near the end of his book, in the last chapter, says Abraham cannot speak, for he cannot utter the word which explains all. That is not so that it is intelligible. He cannot say that it is a test. And he means he's talking to Yitzchak. And there's a question is, why doesn't he tell Yitzchak what's going on? Right? He never says anything to him. And a test of such a sort, be it noted, that the ethical is a temptation. So what is he saying here? He's saying that he's tempted not to do it because what's tempting him is not the unethical. Usually, right, you're tempted, it's a chocolate cake, it's the money and no one's watching, right? You're tempted by doing something unethical. But here, his temptation is the universal, the ethical itself. That's what's tempting him. He was so situated as an immigrant in the sphere of the universal. In other words, he's left the world of morality. When he's commanded to do this, he's left the world of humanity. But the next word, he is still less able to utter. Whereas, as was sufficiently set forth earlier, Avraham makes two movements. He makes the infinite movement of resignation, and he gives up Isaac. This no one can understand because it is a very private venture. But in the next place, he makes the movement of faith every instant. This is his comfort, for he says, but yet this will not come to pass. Or if it does come to pass, then the Lord will give me a new Isaac, by virtue of the absurd. Right? So there's an idea in Christianity, one of the church fathers, Tertullian, he I think it's in Latin, is Creo...
I believe
because it was absurd. Right? They say Dafka, right? And again, this is something different in the Jewish, especially in the because of the Rambam, right? That we say we believe, and there's no machloket between rationality and our belief, and that was the Rambam's program to show this, right? But there's another, way of thinking about things, more mystical way. They say Dafka because it's absurd. That's the reason I'm going to believe, and that's the realm of belief. It's one of the explanations.
Even though it seems totally illogical.
Rav Soloveitchik has a different way of thinking about it.
Yeah,
but no, there's definitely that stream of thought does exist.
Yeah.
But one second, and
Isn't there a sense that Avram is extremely, he gets up early, saddles a donkey, as opposed to in the Stone story, he says, really? I mean, this is discussion. So here you think,
okay.
I mean, don't dive into the act.
Right.
I mean, at least have some discussion.
So
at least with God.
So we're going to see that in the next piece.
Communal was personal vision.
Right, it could be, although it's his son, is a different person also. But there's a lot of discussion about that. Why? And this is also, I don't remember if Kierkegaard mentions this, but again, this silence, right? This idea that he doesn't say anything. He doesn't say to Yitzchak, he doesn't say to Beshkot, he doesn't fight about it. Right? And that's how he understands what the exact test is. So again, he says that the test is between, he calls this the temptation. Usually the temptation is towards non-morality, but here the temptation is to do something which would be normatively moral. And he's not going to do that. He's going to listen to the private word of God. He continues, Avram did not speak. Only one word of his has been preserved, the only reply to Yitzchak, which is also sufficient proof that he had not spoken previously. Yitzchak asked Avram where the lamb is for the burnt offering. And Avram says, God will provide himself the lamb for the burnt offering lesson. Now he interprets this as suggesting that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he knows in his heart of hearts, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not going to tell him at the end to kill Yitzchak. That it's all been, that deep down, when it says, that Abraham knows somewhere that it's a test. And he knows that it's not real. But this is what he's saying, that why